Up until now, we've been pretty much doing everything inside of this index.php file, and there are a couple of problems with that. Firstly, if you are using root to define out all of your pages, and we are going to be looking at controllers later, so this will start to tidy things up, but you'll notice that if you were to define out all of the routes for your application inside of one file, this is gradually going to get really messy, and it's going to be really difficult to kind of work out what you're doing. So what we're going to do now is look at a typical project structure that I usually set up when I first of all set up a Slim application. Now we already have pretty much everything we need, so we're going to kind of keep a lot of this code, and we're just going to move things around just so things are a little bit easier to find, things are a little bit cleaner, and gradually as we get into things like controllers, this will become even more tidy. So what I usually do when I start up a Slim application is I install Slim, as we've already done. Then I go ahead and I create a public folder. So this is the public folder that your web server will point to. This is where we access the kind of root of our application. Now, obviously at the moment this is empty, but we're going to move over our index.php file to here. And because we now have a public folder, what we can also do with inside of here is create things like our JavaScript and our CSS, which will be obviously public to a user. You could have fonts in here, you could have your images in here, and this is where people will land rather than this root directory with all of your other files kind of floating around in here. So what I'm going to do is take this index.php file. I'm going to go ahead and create a new index file inside of here, so index.php, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. So let's go ahead and delete the one in the root of our project. Now we will see an error here. So if we just go ahead and refresh, you can see here require vendor autoload failed. Of course, that's because there is no vendor folder inside of our public directory. Now the whole point of this is that all of your other files like your views and your vendor folder and anything else you create inside of this root directory cannot be accessed by anyone because this will be the root of your project. So what we want to do is kind of require by going back a directory, and we can use dir to get the current directory, we can go back into vendor and include autoload. So that makes things a little bit more secure. None of this is kind of floating around publicly accessible. So what we now need to do is update things like our path to our views and anything else we define in here as well. At the moment, we've just got this, but when we go on to look at things like pulling configuration into our project, then this will need to happen in exactly the same way. So let's go back a directory into resources. So we're coming out of public into resources and requiring in our views. We don't need our views folder to be publicly accessible because we are using them within our project. So hopefully that makes sense. So now what we should be able to do is come over here, and we know that we get a 404 because we don't have a root defined here, but this is now automatically a much better structure. You can go ahead and require in any CSS, JavaScript, like I said, images, any of that kind of stuff. Now, as well as this, we kind of want to separate out our roots from our kind of bootstrap code. So in a very small application, I would define out binding things onto the container as our bootstrap code. Again, you can break this up into as many small pieces as you want. The beauty of Slim is it doesn't require a specific structure. You can pretty much do whatever you want with this, however you feel comfortable. So what I would normally do is inside of, again, the root directory, I would create a bootstrap file, and then into this, I would create some kind of app.php file. Now, what I would then do is take in the code that we have here, maybe even the instantiation of our app, because that does require potentially passing in some settings, and I would go ahead and place it into this file just here. So let's go ahead and pop this just in here. We're not going to run our application from here. We can do that from our index file. And now inside of index, we want to kind of keep this as clean as possible because the responsibility of the index file is really just the entry point into our application. Then we want to go ahead and require this in to boot everything up, and then we want to run our app. So let's go ahead and require this in, and you can use require once if you prefer. It doesn't really matter too much, but that just gives you a little bit of extra protection that you don't require it in more than once. So let's go back a directory into Bootstrap and then load in app.php. Okay, so let's head over and give that a refresh, and we get the same result here. Obviously, nothing's really changed. We're just kind of breaking this up. Now, in terms of our roots, you may wish to have a completely separate roots file. So maybe you were to have a root directory, again within the root of your application, and inside of here you may separate out your API and web roots. And this is something that the framework like Laravel does, and it's actually pretty helpful. So when you do get to building APIs, you could maybe create a root group for all your API roots, and maybe a root group for all of your web roots, or just have your web roots as normal. So in here then, this is where I would define out all of my roots. Again, these are separate. We know where to find them. It makes a lot more sense. So in this case, let's just go and define out just a very, very simple root here, just to echo out home. And over in, say, our Bootstrap file, we can now require this in down here. And then again, it's nice and separate. When we want to update our roots, we come straight over here, we add a root. If we're using controllers, we define out our roots that point to our controllers, which we'll be looking at in the next section. So over in app, let's require this in. So again, we're going to require and use dir to grab the current directory. And then we're going to go back, of course, into roots, and we're going to require in web.php. And that is it. And if you had an API root, you could go ahead and do that, or an API roots file for all of your API roots. We'll keep it simple for now and just do this. And we should now see the following. Perfect. So now this is an automatic improvement. For our roots, we come over here. For any Bootstrap stuff, we come over here. You could, of course, separate out your container bindings into a separate file if you wanted to, and you could probably get away with putting that in Bootstrap or in another directory if you wanted to. But really the point here is that we have complete control over how we structure our application. It's a lot nicer than having a forced application structure. You can pretty much do what you want here. So this is pretty much what I would do. We now have separate folders for anything that we need to add. We know exactly where to come, and everything is nice and tidy, and we can access our index.php kind of landing page directly in here. So now that we've done this, a nice follow-on will be to kind of figure out what happens when we want to create our own classes within our application. You're going to want to do this at some point. So where would we put these? And more importantly, how would we efficiently load these in so we can use them within our application? So what we're going to do is jump over to the next part and look at auto-loading classes with the PSR4 auto-loading standard, which sounds a little bit more complicated than it is.